The honourable member for Regina Lewvan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Back in June, I asked why the government had not started an open and transparent competition to replace the CF-18 fighter jets. At the time, it appeared to many observers that the government was set to do a sole source deal to obtain Super Hornets. To give credit where it is due, the government has not yet purchased Super Hornets through a sole source deal. However, to the government's discredit, it has still not started a transparent process to replace the CF-18s. Now, Madam Speaker, one of the key arguments against an open competition is that it would take too long. So I want to put it on record that if the government had started an open competition when I pressed this issue back in June, we would now be 4 months in to that process. If we back up a little bit more, part of the Liberal election platform was an open and transparent competition to replace the CF-18s. If the Liberals had kept that promise upon taking power, we would now have had a year to conduct that proper process. So if at some point down the road the government comes out with a sole source deal to purchase Super Hornets or some other aircraft to replace CF-18s, and says there's not enough time to run an open competition, let's remember that the government has already missed so many opportunities to do the proper process. So, Madam Speaker, I'm really hoping that the parliamentary secretary across the way is going to update this House on where the government is at on fighter procurement and is going to explain why the government has not yet followed through on its promise for an open competition. But, Madam Speaker, since we have such limited information to work with on fighter procurement, I do want to address another troubling trend in military policy: the increased saber-rattling towards Russia. This summer, our Liberal government thrust Canada into a leading role in a very provocative military deployment to Latvia against Russia. The government made this decision without consulting Parliament. Now, Madam Speaker, I believe that for a deployment of this nature, the government should come before this House and should make the case to explain what it's doing, why it's doing it, and what the exit strategy may be. South of the border, we have the likely next president of the United States, Hillary Clinton, promising a no-fly zone in Syria. Now, what that would actually mean, if the United States were to follow through on that promise, would be to shoot down Russian planes over Syria. Madam Speaker, in short, that would mean war with Russia. Now, earlier this month, Russia conducted a civil defense drill with 40 million people. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists has its doomsday clock set at 3 minutes to midnight. I'm proud of the role that the NDP has played as a voice for nuclear disarmament and peace, but this should not be a partisan issue. Canada as a whole should be working for nuclear disarmament and peace. Unfortunately, this Liberal government has obstructed UN efforts to ban nuclear weapons and continued to take a provocative stand versus Russia. Madam Speaker, our country needs a better defense procurement policy and less military provocation.
Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of National Defence.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for raising the question. First of all, let me say that I've noticed that being in this place for a number of years, that whenever there's a great success, it's greeted with deafening silence. So today we had actually a great success in the National Shipbuilding Strategy, where the government announced that it had shortened the time process by 2 years by simply picking a single hull design, and then has invited 13 contractors, all of the interested contractors, to submit bids, and that'll all be done by April. And so we're moving at almost at lightning speed in government terms, to fulfilling the crying need of the Canadian Navy. So I take note that the honourable member submitted his question in June, and he should take note that shortly after the submission of his question on July the 6th, to be precise, the government invited all 5 contractors in an open and transparent way to update all of their information, and all of that information was collated and received on the quality of the various jets that were being considered, and that information has been now brought forward, collated, and it is being prepared for a memorandum to cabinet. So, in the about 1 year time, we've gone from what is essentially a chaotic process of procurement for the jets to having the cabinet make a clear decision as the kind of jet that is needed to replace the F-18s. 2, to invite the all 5 contractors to submit in an open, transparent way what they think that they could do to fulfill the requirements as set by cabinet. 3, complete an analysis and collation of the information in a form, and 4, the preparation of a memorandum to cabinet so that the cabinet can make an informed decision on this open and transparent process. So, Madam Speaker, I think quite candidly that we have more than responded to the honourable member's inquiry. Thank you.
The honourable member for Regina, Lewvan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate the response from the Parliamentary Secretary. I noticed he used the adjectives open and transparent many times. He said they were gathering information in an open way, but even the Parliamentary Secretary has not claimed today that the government has kept its promise to conduct an open and transparent competition to replace the CF-18s, and that's certainly what the NDP is pushing for in this House. I also note, Madam Speaker, there was no response at all to the points I made about provocation of Russia, and I would simply note that U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt's foreign policy was to speak softly and carry a big stick. By contrast, our Prime Minister's foreign policy is to speak inconsistently and carry a selfie stick. Madam Speaker, our country needs better defence procurement and less military provocation.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of National Defence.
I don't know how more open and transparent we can be in terms of trying to invite all 5 contractors to submit their material and try to assemble and collate that stuff in accordance with a statement of requirements as set out by the Cabinet. That's pretty open and transparent to my way of thinking. As to provocation, Madam Speaker, I'm not quite sure who's doing the provoking here, Madam Speaker. It wasn't anyone else that invaded Crimea other than Russia. It wasn't anybody else who'd been bombing Syria other than Russia. It's not anybody else who's continually encroaching on international airspace other than Russia. It's not anybody else who's building military facilities up in the Arctic other than Russia. So, Madam Speaker, you can take the choice of burying your head in the sand and ignore all of these provocations, but, Madam Speaker, you're going to have a hard time convincing the Finns, the Estonians, the Latvians, the Lithuanians, the Poles, and the Ukrainians that it's anyone other than Russia that's doing the provocation.